It's interesting to me that every major spiritual tradition in the world knows as one of its core experiences a period of emptying, a time of releasing that which has shaped a person before he or she began the great spiritual quest for meaning and integrity. Strangely enough, I believe that it is our interconnectedness to the world and to all of life where we can find the answer to the question of meaning and purpose. We saw with the butterfly effect the interconnectedness of external things, but I believe that that interconnectedness is internal as well, that it is in the very substance out of which we are formed. It is in our DNA. And we are not unique. We share that with all of the living systems of the universe. So as an analogy this morning, I would like to reflect on the world of plants. I am an avid vegetable gardener, and I have long been fascinated by the plant cycle of life. And as I talk about this, keep in mind the age of receiving and the age of giving in our human life stages that Henri Nouwen spoke of. A seed begins with everything as a given. The seed did not earn or acquire any of its attributes on its own. It is what it has been given. All is a gift that has been received. Think of Nouwen's phrase, entering into this world, we are what we are given. A seed is what it has been given. And as that seed falls to the ground and is buried, it receives energy from the sun and nourishment from water and the earth, and it is sustained as it begins to grow. And over the next span of its life, it continues to receive. All of life is a given. Nourishment from the soil, energy from the sun. It is shaped and guided by the loving hands of the gardener who tills the soil. Up to now, all of life in that plant has been a life built on acquiring. It's all been about gathering the energy and the nourishment and receiving the care that is needed in order for it to grow from a seedling into a productive plant. But once the plant matures, then it becomes time for fruit bearing. It is a time to give back. And if the fruit is not harvested, we know what happens. The plants on which the fruit is not harvested begin to die. And the yield is greatly diminished. And if the fruit is left unpicked, it will eventually rot. But if in this time of giving back, the fruit is harvested, think in terms of giving, of divestment of that which has been gathered. If the tomatoes are picked, and the beans and the cucumbers and the zucchinis are gathered, the plant will continue to produce abundantly for the season. And it continues to give until the season is over and the plant dies. But if you are a real gardener, the story is not finished. Because there is another chapter yet to be written for that plant, another part of the story to be told. In death, the plant continues to give and is transformed. As the dead plants are gathered up and placed in the recycling bin, there it is turned and cared for, and it is transformed into rich, organic compost to be returned to the soil so that it may nurture and feed the next generation of plants. For everything, there is a season. There is a time for receiving, and there is a time for giving. It's interesting that for plants and the rest of the animal kingdom, this is a natural process. Only humans, in their wisdom, only humans have removed themselves from this natural cycle of life. In order for us to find meaning and purpose, in order for us to discover integrity, we need to rediscover our connectedness to creation and to the rhythm of life. These years, this stage of life that we call older adult, is the season of fruitfulness for us. It is a time for our rediscovery of the interconnectedness of all things, a time for our giving back that which we have received. And I'm not talking simply about giving back material things, though there is that. But we have received so much more. We have received the wisdom of the years of life experience. Life experience, if we listen, tells us of the lie of achieving peace through victory. Life experience tells us of the lie of the myth of redemptive violence. Life experience tells us that we are all in this thing together. That the final solution is about acceptance and tolerance of others and celebration of diversity, and not about ovens and apartheid and walls that divide. Life experience and the wisdom of the ages has taught us the lesson that empires fail, that economic systems are fallible, that military might is transient, and that walls do not bring security. And guess what? The world desperately needs to hear that wisdom, which is gathered together and stored in this treasure that we call older adults. There will be a sermon on that topic later in this series. Part of the task of the adult years is to recognize the gifts that we have received and accumulated in our gathering years, and finding a way to share them and give them back to the world that knows far too little about giving and is absolutely, totally fixated on accumulating. And you know, in one sense, Scripture does not put a limit on gathering. Not at all. The limits that Scripture knows is placed on hoarding. In the story of manna, the instructions were quite clear. Gather as much as you need. No restrictions. But if you were greedy, and you insisted on gathering more than what you needed, if you tried to accumulate it, if you tried to hoard the manna, you know what happened to it. It turned rotten overnight and became useless. In the parable of the rich man, whose land was produced so abundantly that he didn't know what to do with his crops until he finally decided, I know what I'll do. I'll pull down my old barn, build a bigger one, and put all my stuff in there, sit back, relax, and take life easy. in that parable, the man was not chastised because of the abundance of his crop. He was chastised because he forgot the meaning and the purpose of life and thought that his gifts were for hoarding and not for sharing. He forgot the principle that to whom much is given, much will be required. And so I think the lessons of faith and spirituality might say in your gathering years, gather as much as you like, as long as you gather fairly and justly. But just remember, the purpose of life is found not in having and not in accumulating, not even in doing. The purpose of life is found in being, and being in relationship. The Hebrew Scriptures and the creation story hear the purpose of life in the Creator's command. In the story of Genesis of creation, the command given is be fruitful and multiply. And the Christian Scriptures echo that same thought. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. In other words, the meaning and the purpose of life is not found in the gathering years, but in the sharing years. It is in sharing, in giving back, that opens us up to whatever lies ahead. Just like the plant. Once it has given its fruit, it dies to self and is regenerated in compost. So too, you and I are regenerated as we offer our gifts. And in dying to self, both as a metaphor and as an actuality. It is in that process of dying that we are reborn. So I close with these words from Jesus. For those who want to save their life will lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel or of the good news, they will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? And finally, very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Be fruitful and multiply.